Hello, Bio30, and welcome to our lesson on the pancreas. We're going to be learning today what the types of diabetes are, and specifically learning about one type and how it affects the glands in your body, as well as about insulin and glucagon. So, eventually, your goals for today are to identify the glands that cause diabetes, draw the feedback loops, which you should have drawn in a separate video, as well as identify causes and symptoms of type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and identify patients from your case studies that may suffer from this disease. So if you could find what happens when things go wrong, the pancreas. Now, I love the pancreas. I think it's one of the greatest organs you have. It does so many great things, so many great things. And so it's located just in between your kidneys, up and behind your liver, and it is attached to your small intestine. If we were to zoom really, really, really close into it, you are going to see this structure here called the islets of Langerhans, and you're going to see both beta cells and alpha cells located inside, which you know are parts of how we control insulin and glucagon. So what happens when things don't work in your pancreas? What's going on? So we're going to specifically talk about insulin, so the beta cells. So when your pancreas doesn't work, you have diabetes, specifically known as diabetes mellitus or mellitus. This is caused by a lack of production of insulin from your actual pancreas. So your pancreas is not producing insulin, or it is producing low amounts of insulin, which is really key to understand. And we're going to talk about the two types specifically in that kind of information. So diabetes mellitus is essentially it's a genetic disorder. Now you can get it type 1 is when you're born, and type 2 you can develop over your lifetime. But the thing is both of them have a genetic component. Now, type 1 is early onset or juvenile, which means you're born with it, and type 2 means you get it later in life. So what is happening in both cases is you're not producing enough insulin because the beta cells within your islets of Langerhans have deteriorated, are damaged, or never function properly. So this results in something we call high blood sugar levels, which is hyperglycemia. Okay, so hyper meaning too much, glyco meaning sugar, emia meaning in blood. So too much sugar in blood is essentially what hyperglycemia means. So you have high blood sugar levels, especially after you eat. So somebody who has diabetes or diabetes type 1 or 2, if it's not under control, when they urinate, if someone were to test their urine, glucose would appear in their urine, which, if you remember from chapter 9 in Bio 20, the nephron, that is one of the things that our body reabsorbs right away. So glucose can get into the nephron, but our body takes it back into our bloodstream right away. You have way too much glucose in your bloodstream, your body doesn't know what to do with it, you're going to start urinating it out. The other issue is if glucose is in your nephron, which we didn't learn this in Bio 20 because we said, nope, it's all got to go back. But let's say glucose does stay in your nephron. What ends up happening is that glucose inside your nephron is a magnet for water, because water wants to move from high concentrations to low concentrations. Wherever there is solutes, water follows. So these are essentially a solute, and water wants to pretty much follow it. So it goes into the nephron and it draws water away from the body. So you end up excreting large amounts of volumes of urine when you have diabetes, large amounts of urine. Now, the symptoms that are found when you are talking about diabetes mellitus is frequent urination and constant thirst, low energy levels because glucose is used for glycolysis, which is used for cell resp. If we're not putting it into our cells, we can't do cellular respiration. So low energy levels. Lots of sugar in your blood, but little movement into your cells. You start breaking down fats and proteins because your body can't get the glucose into the cells to do cell respiration. So it actually starts breaking down the fats and proteins found in your muscle. When you break down those fats and proteins, especially the fats, you get something called acetone breath, which if you have uncontrolled diabetes and you blew into, let's say, a breathalyzer, you could actually fail a breathalyzer because your fats break down into what we call acetone. So let's talk about the two different types. So type 1, early onset, and type 2, maturity or late onset. There's actually a couple in between. There's like type 1.5 that you get a little bit in between these two. But for our purposes, we only talk about the two. So juvenile is because your immune system made antibodies that attacked your beta cells, is probably the most common one. You could be born with little to no beta cells. You could have um, non-functioning beta cells, but essentially for some reason, your body produced antibodies that attacked them. Okay. So right from the get-go, you cannot make insulin, none whatsoever. Your body is not producing it. So anyone on who has type 1 diabetes will be on daily injections of insulin. Okay. And this is because they need the insulin in their body. They don't have any. Now, some treatments that you can use besides just daily injections is there is ways to transplant beta cells into the pancreas to help your body start to produce a little bit of insulin. Somebody who suffers from type 1 diabetes may seem stuff like low energy, really, really, really thirsty, large volumes of glucose in their urine, nerve damage, maybe even gangrene, which is like the death of the skin and then it becomes necrotic. So gangrene is like an infection. Now, the thing is most of the times these will show up in babies because you have to remember you're probably going to be born with it if it's early onset. Some people will find out a little bit later, maybe like 9, 10, 11 years old because they had some functioning beta cells and then over time they stopped functioning. So, but a lot of times you're going to see these kinds of things in babies. Onset, late onset or adult maturity type 2 is something that happens because our insulin receptors on the cells, so the ones that attach to insulin, stop responding to insulin, okay? Stop responding, and then they produce less and less insulin over time because they're like, oh, we have enough, or because they don't realize that they're not responding to the cell receptors. Many people can control type 2 diabetes with diet, exercises, changing to a healthier living style, but may, if they don't do those things, depend on insulin later in life. That being said, not every single time will diet, exercise, and healthier lifestyles always work. Because if slowly your beta cells have been damaged and damaged and damaged, you're just going to get to the point where you're going to need insulin. Okay. They too suffer from low energy, high volumes of urine, and glucose in their urine. So let's talk about blood sugar. So I said diabetes can be an early onset of it can be hyperglycemia, too much sugar in the blood. So people who have type 1 and type 2 diabetes have vast ranges, massive ranges of what their blood sugars look like. So you have a little bit of a different graph than I do in my notes, but it's still very similar. You have a optimal level. Now, optimal level ranges from like low, like 70, all the way up to almost 140. And within that range, you have big spikes. So 90 milligrams per deciliter is roughly a baseline. You can see it here in mine. It's where it levels out to. But when you see a spike, that's normal because you ate food and sugar has to go into your blood. And before it gets absorbed into your cells, it's going to hang out in your blood for a while. So you're going to see a spike in blood sugar. But what you'll notice is as your body releases insulin and starts digesting and bringing it into your cells, you're going to level back out quite nicely. You eat again, it does it again, and you level out quite nicely until you eat again, and then you level out quite nicely. That shows no diabetes. If you look at the other two, you're going to see not only do they not fall within the baseline of around 90 milligrams per deciliter, their highs and lows are extreme. Okay. So someone with type 1 who produces no insulin at all is going to have huge spikes and huge drops as their body doesn't know what to do with all this insulin. So they'll get all this insulin in their body and then their cells can't use it. So then you'll urinate it out or get rid of it, but it doesn't eventually get used up into the cells, but it does get excreted out, some of it. Then you're going to eat again and it's going to do it again. And then you're going to have really low lows. And then you're going to do it again. And then it's going to eventually over nighttime taper off. Type 2, who has somewhat functioning insulin, you'll see they do also have highs and lows. They have higher than normal already blood glucose levels, and they have little bits of bumps and inflections, but they never get that nice leveling out in between time periods. And that's because their body is not taking up glucose. So that's how you would tell if someone is type 1 or type 2 by looking at a blood glucose graph or someone's blood glucose levels. So this is an example of a little boy who is suffering probably from type 1 diabetes, who looks very malnourished, but he probably is malnourished looking because he's not able to utilize the glucose his body needs. So he has low energy, he's not taking in a lot of fluids, he's urinating a lot, okay? On the flip side, as soon as you give them insulin, and as soon as they have insulin, you will see a drastic difference. You will see them starting to retain their fluids. You're going to see them having more energy. They're going to eat more. They're utilizing the food a bit better. So it's a different change. So we keep talking about hyperglycemia, and I want to talk about both. I want to talk about hyperglycemia, which you can see here is way too much sugar in your blood. But there's also something that can happen on the flip side, which is hypoglycemia. Hypo is too little sugar in your blood. Okay. So blood sugars can rise and falls after a meal. A sharp rise after a meal, okay, is what we would call hyperglycemia. But then that low drop is what we would call hypoglycemia. People who have hypoglycemia, okay, tend to eat and then right away start to feel icky because they'll spike their blood sugar, but then they'll go really low. And sleepiness is one of them. So they'll be sleepy, they'll feel sweaty, they'll feel pale, they'll have lack of coordination, they'll feel dizzy and sick. They could be really, really irritable because, again, they don't have any energy and they have no sugars to help them with the balancing of the creating energy. And they're going to be really, really hungry. Okay. Because, again, they're not utilizing what they're eating. The opposite is in hyperglycemia. You're going to have dry mouth, increased thirst, blurred vision, weakness, headache, and frequent urination because your glucose is staying in your blood and then it's being excreted out. So you're thirsty because it's pulling water from your blood, and then you're going to the bathroom lots because the water's just going right through you. So that is diabetes type 1, type 2. You should have just a little bit of notes about both of them. And in the other video, you will have watched how it functions part 1 and have drawn the 2 feedback loops for both insulin and glucagon. If you have any questions, please let me know.